The bright lights of the studio ceiling blazed down, making the air feel heavy and warm. It was one of those popular daytime talk shows where the guests are usually there to laugh, tell a few funny stories, and promote their latest projects. But today, the energy in the room felt different. It was thicker, almost electric. You could sense that the audience was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen, though they didn't know what yet. Sitting on the couch, looking relaxed and humble as always, was Keanu Reeves. He wasn't acting like a big-shot movie star who owned the place. He was dressed simply, wearing a dark suit and a black t-shirt, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He had that familiar, gentle look on his face, the kind that makes you feel like he's just a regular guy who happened to wander onto a movie set. He was there to talk about his new action film, the explosions, and the crazy stunts he had to perform. That was the deal. That was what was supposed to happen. But across from him, sitting in the plush hostess chair, was a man with a very different vibe. This host was known for his sharp tongue and his love for controversy. He liked to think of himself as the smartest person in the room, a guy who wasn't afraid to ask the tough questions. He often talked about how much he cared about people, about kindness, and about progressive values. But if you watched closely, you could see he didn't really care about those things. He cared about attention. He wanted a viral moment. He wanted a clip that would get millions of views on social media, no matter who he hurt to get it. As the show came back from a commercial break, the red on-air sign lit up, glowing intensely in the dark studio. The host flashed a practiced smile at the camera, then turned to Keanu. He started the interview exactly how you'd expect. He asked about the movie. He asked if doing all those stunts hurt his back. Keanu answered politely. He spoke about how hard the crew worked, and how lucky he was to be in the business. He was kind, he was respectful, and he was giving the host everything he needed to make a good, normal show. For a few minutes, everything seemed fine. The audience laughed at a few jokes. The host nodded along, but his eyes were wandering. He was looking at his notes, then at the camera, then back at Keanu with a look that said he was getting bored. He wasn't interested in the movie. He wanted to shake things up. He wanted to see if he could get a reaction out of the one actor in Hollywood famous for being unshakable. The host shifted in his chair, crossing his legs. He decided to steer the ship away from the safe waters of movie talk and into dangerous personal territory. He cleared his throat, interrupting Keanu mid-sentence about the choreography of a fight scene. The vibe in the room changed instantly. The audience stopped clapping. Even the cameraman, who usually looked bored, seemed to stiffen up. You know, Keanu, the host began, his voice taking on a sharper, mock-friendly tone. We've seen you in these tough guy roles for decades. The world thinks they know you. But recently, the paparazzi have caught you with someone new. And let's be honest, people are talking. Keanu paused. He didn't look nervous, just cautious. He smiled slightly, thinking this was just a normal lead-in to talk about his personal life in a respectful way. He nodded, waiting for the question. But the host didn't ask a normal question. He leaned in closer to the microphone, dropping his voice just enough so that everyone would have to lean in to listen. It was a trick, a way to pull people into his drama. I mean, you're a massive star, the host continued, a smirk playing on the corner of his mouth. You could have anyone in the world. Models, actresses, anyone. And yet, you choose, well, let's talk about her. You could feel the air leave the room. It was the kind of awkward silence that makes your stomach hurt. Keanu's smile didn't disappear, but it became fixed, like a mask. He sat up a little straighter. He knew where this was going. The host, blinded by his own desire for a viral hit, didn't see the warning signs. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was setting up a joke that would show off how witty and edgy he was. He had no idea that he had just woken up a sleeping giant. The host pressed a button on his console, and a large photo flashed on the screen behind them. It was a picture of Keanu and his girlfriend, walking down the street, holding hands and smiling. They looked happy. Normal. Just two people in love. But the host didn't see love, he saw an opportunity to be cruel. He looked from the screen back to Keanu, ready to deliver the insult that would blow up the internet, completely unaware that he was about to destroy his own reputation instead. The giant screen behind the stage lit up, filling the studio with a crisp, high-definition image. It wasn't a glamorous photo from a red carpet event, and it wasn't a still shot from one of his movies. It was a candid, grainy picture taken by a paparazzi from a distance. It showed Keanu walking down a busy city street, holding hands with his girlfriend. They weren't looking at the camera. They were just looking at each other, laughing about something private. It was the kind of moment that usually gets edited out of the final cut, a slice of real life that millions of people try to capture but rarely find. When the image appeared, something changed in Keanu. The movie star mask he had to wear for the interview slipped away just a little bit. He didn't look at the camera to see how the lighting was hitting his face. He didn't check his posture. He just looked at the woman on the screen. You could see his whole face soften. The lines around his eyes, which had been tight from the bright lights and the heavy makeup, relaxed instantly. It was a look of pure, unfiltered affection. He leaned back against the couch, not out of boredom, but because seeing her made him feel at home. That was a good day, Keanu said softly into his microphone. His voice was different now, quieter, more gentle. We were just coming back from getting some food. She's amazing. The audience immediately picked up on this genuine shift in energy. A collective awe rippled through the rows of seats. People love celebrity gossip, but they love a genuine love story even more. They leaned forward in their chairs, captivated by seeing this tough action hero turn into a regular guy in love. For a moment, the show felt real. It felt like two human beings just talking about life. But the host didn't seem to share that sentiment. While Keanu was looking at the screen with warmth, the host was looking at Keanu with a calculating stare. He tapped his pen against his notebook, his smile frozen in place. He realized that the interview was drifting into territory he couldn't control. If they just sat here talking about how happy they were, it was nice, but it wasn't content. It wasn't controversial. It didn't get people arguing on the internet. The host cleared his throat loudly, a sharp sound that cut through the gentle atmosphere Keanu had created. He shifted gears instantly. She is certainly unique, the host said. He emphasized the word unique in a way that sounded like he was trying to be polite but actually meant the exact opposite. He raised an eyebrow at Keanu, waiting for him to take the bait. Keanu turned his gaze away from the screen and back to the host. The softness in his eyes faded a fraction, replaced by a cautious curiosity. He sensed the change in tone, but he was a polite person. He decided to give the host the benefit of the doubt. He nodded, thinking the host was about to pay a compliment to her work as an artist. She is, Keanu agreed. She's an incredible artist. Her work is very conceptual, dealing with language and identity. It's really inspiring to watch her create. The host let out a short, dismissive laugh. He waved his hand in the air as if he were swatting away a fly. He didn't care about the art. He didn't care about the concepts. He was looking at the surface of things, and he didn't like what he saw compared to the usual Hollywood standards. Yes, the art, sure, the host said, his voice dripping with condescension. But look, let us be honest here. We all know how this town works. We all know the expectations. The host paused for effect, making sure the cameras were zoomed in tight on his face. He was about to pivot to his favorite topic, using progressive ideals to actually judge people more harshly. He loved to act like he was the most open-minded person in the room, but only when people fit into his specific idea of how they should look or act. I mean, in this day and age, with the platforms you have, the power you hold, the host continued, leaning across the small table that separated them, invading Keanu's personal space slightly. Usually, we see men in your position with people who, well, match the aesthetic. Younger, tighter, more, you know, the Hollywood look. The smile on the host's face was nasty now. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was making a sociological point about beauty standards or age gaps, but really, he was just being a bully. He was insulting a woman he didn't know, and a relationship he didn't understand, all while hiding behind the disguise of just asking questions. Keanu didn't say a word. He just stared at the host. The studio felt incredibly quiet now. The audience wasn't making any noise. They looked at each other, confused. Was this really happening? Was this guy really criticizing a man's girlfriend right to his face on live TV? The host, sensing the awkwardness but mistaking it for suspense, pushed harder. He wanted to force Keanu to admit that he had settled or that he was making some kind of political statement by dating someone who didn't look like a supermodel. It's just brave, I guess, the host added, letting the word brave hang in the air like a rotten smell. Most guys would worry about the optics. But you seem comfortable stepping out with, well, someone who isn't exactly what people expect you to be with. He sat back, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. He looked at the camera, then back at Keanu, waiting for the actor to get flustered, to stammer, or maybe even to apologize. He expected Keanu to play the game, to laugh it off and say, "Yeah, she's great, I got lucky." But the host didn't know who he was dealing with. He didn't know that for Keanu, loyalty wasn't a game, and respect wasn't a bargaining chip. The trap had been set, and the prey had walked right into it, but the host was about to realize that he was the one who was actually caught. The silence that followed the host's comment was heavy. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, it was the kind of awkward, suffocating silence that makes your ears ring. The word brave seemed to float in the air above the stage, ugly and exposed. Usually, at this point in a talk show, the audience laughs. There is a safety in laughter, a signal that everyone understands the joke and that no one is getting hurt. But no one laughed. In fact, a few people in the front rows actually gasped. They looked at each other with wide eyes, shocked that the host had said something so rude about a woman who wasn't there to defend herself. The host, however, didn't seem to notice the temperature in the room drop. He was too busy admiring his own performance. He sat there with a self-satisfied grin, bobbing his head slightly, as if he had just delivered some profound wisdom. He truly believed he was being clever. In his mind, he wasn't being mean, he was being real. He thought he was pointing out the hypocrisy of Hollywood by suggesting that Keanu was lowering his standards. He didn't understand that true love isn't about standards or optics, it's about connection. Keanu Reeves sat perfectly still. For a long moment, he didn't move a muscle. The easy, genuine smile that had been on his face just seconds ago had completely vanished. It wasn't replaced by anger, not yet. Instead, his face went blank. It became a calm, unreadable mask that he had likely perfected over decades of dealing with the press. He wasn't looking at the camera anymore, and he wasn't looking at the big screen behind him. He was looking directly at the host. It was a focused, intense stare that made the host shift uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair. The host felt the weight of that stare and tried to backtrack, but only slightly. He chuckled nervously, a sound that came out high-pitched and fake. "I mean, come on, Keanu. You know what I'm saying. It's refreshing, in a way. Usually, guys like you, they trade in for a newer model the second they hit a certain age. You're sticking to your guns. It's admirable. In a nostalgic sort of way." Every word out of the host's mouth made the situation worse. He was digging a hole and he just kept grabbing a bigger shovel. He was implying that Keanu's girlfriend was somehow less valuable because of her age or her appearance. He was reducing a human being to a model that could be traded in, like an old car. The audience began to murmur. The mood in the studio was turning from shock to annoyance. People didn't come to see a bully pick on the nicest guy in Hollywood. Finally, Keanu moved. He didn't stand up or slam his fist on the table. He just leaned forward, bringing his elbows to rest on his knees. This small movement made him look more grounded, more solid. It signaled that he was done playing the role of the polite guest. "You know," Keanu started. His voice was low, quiet even, but because the studio was so silent, it carried to every corner of the room. "I was really enjoying our conversation until right now." The host's smirk faltered. He blinked rapidly, looking confused. He opened his mouth to interrupt, to make another joke, but Keanu kept going. His tone wasn't aggressive. It wasn't loud. It was just incredibly serious. It was the voice you use when you are telling someone something they absolutely need to hear. "You keep using words like aesthetic and optics," Keanu said, looking the host right in the eyes. "You're talking about her as if she's an accessory. As if she's a prop in a movie." The host laughed again, trying to regain control of the narrative. He waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, come on, don't be so sensitive. We're just having a bit of fun. It's a talk show. We talk about these things." "I'm not laughing," Keanu said simply. The words hit the air like a stone dropping into water, "and I don't think she's a joke." The tension in the room spiked. The cameramen stopped checking their focus. The producer in the booth probably shouted into the headset, but nobody on stage was listening. This was a moment of human truth clashing against fake entertainment. Keanu took a slow breath. He wasn't just angry about an insult, he was angry about the principle. He was angry that someone thought it was okay to publicly devalue a person he loved based purely on superficial nonsense. "You asked me earlier about my character in the movie," Keanu continued, his voice steady and strong. "You asked how I tap into that feeling of protecting people. It's not a trick. It's not acting. You protect what matters. You protect the people you love." He gestured vaguely toward the screen where the photo of his girlfriend was still displayed. It looked innocent enough, but in this context, it felt like a piece of evidence in a trial. "This woman is the most incredible person I have ever met," Keanu said. The passion in his voice was undeniable. "She is brilliant. She is kind. She makes me laugh when I want to cry. She has lived a life full of experiences and wisdom that I respect and admire. When I look at her, I don't see an aesthetic. I don't see optics. I see my best friend." The host's face was starting to turn red. He realized too late that he had miscalculated. He thought Keanu would be an easy target, someone too polite to fight back. He thought he could poke the bear and the bear would just smile. But he had forgotten that even the gentlest creatures will fight back if you threaten what they love. The host cleared his throat, trying to find a way out, a way to spin this so that he didn't look like the villain. "Look, I didn't mean to offend." The host stammered, his voice losing its confident edge. "I was just trying to say that it goes against the Hollywood norm. That's all." "The Hollywood norm." Keanu repeated the phrase slowly, as if he were tasting it and finding it sour. "Who made that norm? You, the people sitting at home watching gossip shows. Why does anyone think they have the right to judge what love looks like?" Keanu paused. He looked out into the audience, making eye contact with a few people who were nodding in agreement. Then he turned back to the host, his expression darkening. "You insulted her just now," Keanu said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "You insulted her on live television because you think she doesn't fit into your little box of what is beautiful. Do you know how small that makes you look? Do you know how empty that sounds?" The host opened his mouth, but no sound came out. For the first time in the interview, he had nothing to say. The power in the room had completely shifted. It was no longer the host's show, it was Keanu's stage. And he was just getting started. The shutdown wasn't a reaction, it was a deliberate choice to stand up for dignity against cruelty. The host sat frozen in his chair, his mouth slightly open as if he was trying to catch a breath that wasn't there. The confidence he had just a few minutes ago had completely evaporated. You could see a small bead of sweat forming on his forehead, catching the glare of the studio lights. He looked like a student who had just realized he hadn't studied for the most important exam of the year, except instead of a grade, he was about to lose his dignity in front of millions of people. Keanu didn't look away. He didn't blink. He held the host in a gaze that was intense but not angry. It was the look of a man who has decided that enough is enough. He wasn't there to fight, he was there to correct a wrong. "You seem to think that because you are on a stage with a microphone, your opinion on how people look matters," Keanu said, his voice steady and calm, which made it cut even deeper. "You hide behind this idea of being modern, of being progressive, as you like to call it. But the way you just spoke about her, that isn't new. That isn't forward thinking. That is the oldest, most tired way of thinking in the world." The host shifted his weight, trying to find a comfortable spot, but there wasn't one. He let out a nervous, high-pitched chuckle and tapped his papers on the desk. Okay, I get it. We're getting a bit deep here. Folks, we're just having a passionate discussion about celebrity culture, right Keanu, my friend? You know I didn't mean any harm. It's just observations." "They aren't observations," Keanu corrected him gently but firmly. "They are judgments. And they are cruel." He leaned in even closer, his forearms resting on his knees, his entire posture focused and grounded. "You are sitting there asking me about a woman who has more depth in her little finger than you have in your entire worldview. You talk about her hair, you talk about her clothes, you talk about her age as if these are things that define her worth. They don't. Not even a little bit." The audience was completely silent now. You could hear a pin drop. Usually, at this point in a show, the host would cut to a commercial to save face, or the band would start playing to drown out the tension. but nobody moved. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of this rare, unscripted moment of honesty. The host looked toward the cameraman, panic flashing in his eyes, silently begging for a break, but the director in the booth knew gold when they saw it. The on-air sign stayed red. "You want to talk about values," Keanu continued, his voice gaining a quiet strength. "You claim to stand for kindness, for accepting people for who they are. But the second someone doesn't fit into your little box of what a Hollywood girlfriend should look like, you mock them. That isn't kindness. That is hypocrisy." The host opened his mouth to speak, to interrupt, but Keanu held up a hand. It wasn't an aggressive gesture, just a signal to stop. The host actually flinched and closed his mouth. "She is an artist," Keanu said, his tone softening as he spoke about her, the love evident in every word. "She makes me think. She challenges me. When I am with her, I don't feel like a celebrity. I don't feel like a product. I feel like a human being. That is rare. That is precious. And I will not sit here and let you, or anyone else, cheapen that with your cheap jokes." The host's face was turning a dark shade of red now. He realized that he had lost control of the narrative completely. He had wanted a viral clip, and he was getting one, but he wasn't the hero of the story. He was the villain. He tried a different tactic. He tried to look hurt. "Keanu, you're taking this very personally," the host said, his voice shaking just a little. "I'm just the guy asking the questions the audience wants to know. I'm just doing my job. If your job requires you to insult innocent people to get views," Keanu replied, without a second of hesitation, "then you should ask yourself what kind of job that is. And you should ask yourself why you think it's okay." It was a devastating line. It wasn't an insult, it was a mirror. He was forcing the host to look at himself, and the host clearly didn't like what he saw. The man who usually smirked and laughed his way through interviews suddenly looked very small and very shallow. He slumped back in his chair, his expensive suit looking a little too loose, his smile gone. The air in the studio had shifted completely. The power dynamic had done a complete 180. 5 minutes ago, the host was the powerful gatekeeper of fame, and Keanu was the guest trying to promote a movie. Now, Keanu was the authority figure, a man of principle standing up for what was right, and the host was just a man who had been caught being mean-spirited on national television. Keanu sat back, adjusting his jacket. He didn't look triumphant. He didn't look like he had won a prize. He just looked like a man who had done what he had to do. He wasn't trying to destroy the host's career, he was just trying to set a boundary. "I'm not angry," Keanu said, breaking the heavy silence with a tone of finality. "I just want to be clear. Love is not about optics. It's not about your ratings. It's about two people connecting on a level that nobody else gets to understand. She makes me happy. That should be enough for anyone. If it's not enough for you, that is your problem, not mine." The host nodded mechanically, his eyes glued to his desk. He couldn't look up. He knew that if he looked at Keanu, or at the audience, or at the camera, he would crumble. He had tried to use Keanu's kindness as a weakness, assuming that the nice guy wouldn't fight back. He learned the hard way that being nice doesn't mean being weak. It means you have the strength to be kind until someone crosses a line, and then you have the strength to stand your ground. The tension in the room was so thick it felt like you could touch it. Everyone was waiting for what would happen next. Would the host apologize? Would he cut the feed? Would he try to laugh it off again? But Keanu wasn't done yet. There was one more thing he needed to say to make sure the message stuck, not just for the host, but for everyone watching. He wasn't just defending a girlfriend, he was making a stand against the toxic culture that the host represented. "You call this a show," Keanu said quietly, almost to himself, but the microphone picked it up. "Real life isn't a show. Real hearts get broken by words like yours. I'm here to remind you that." The host was sweating now. It was visible on his forehead, catching the harsh studio lights. He looked like a man who had realized he was standing on a trapdoor and the lever had already been pulled. He tried one last time to grab the steering wheel of the conversation and steer it back to safety. He forced a chuckle, the sound dry and uncomfortable, and tapped his pen loudly on the desk. Okay, touchy subject, I get it," the host said, his voice pitching higher than usual. He turned to the camera, trying to include the audience in the joke, but there was no laughter coming from the crowd. "We're just passionate people here. Keanu is a passionate guy. We love that about you, really. Let us take a quick commercial break and come back and talk about the movie, shall we?" He started reaching for his cards, eager to shuffle the topic away and pretend the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. He thought he could just hit the reset button, that they could go back to the fake world of Hollywood promotion where everyone smiles and pretends to be best friends. But Keanu didn't reach for his water glass. He didn't lean back. He simply shook his head slowly. It was a small movement, but it stopped the host cold. "No," Keanu said. The word was quiet, but it had the weight of a slammed door. The host froze, his hand hovering over his cue cards. Sorry," he stammered. "I don't think we need a break," Keanu said, looking directly into the lens of the main camera, bypassing the host entirely. He spoke to the people watching at home. "And I don't think we need to pretend that what was just said was okay. We don't need to move on to the movie. I'm done talking about the movie." The studio went dead silent. The crew behind the cameras stopped moving. Even the people in the control room, watching through the monitors, were likely holding their breath. This was uncharted territory. Guests didn't just take over the show. Guests didn't tell the host when the interview was over. Keanu turned back to the host. His expression wasn't angry anymore. It was just sad. He looked at the host with a sense of pity that was far more damaging than any anger could have been. "You asked me why I'm with her," Keanu said, his voice calm and clear. "You tried to make it a joke. You tried to make it about politics, or about age, or about looks. But you missed the point completely. The point is that she makes me a better person. When you are lucky enough to find someone in this crazy world who looks at you and sees who you really are, you don't worry about what the host of a talk show thinks. You don't worry about the optics." He leaned forward one last time, resting his hands on his knees, locking eyes with the man who had tried to humiliate him. "You have a platform here," Keanu said. "You could use it to do something good. You could make people feel good. You could inspire people. But today, you used it to be mean. And honestly, I don't want to be a part of that." Without waiting for a response, Keanu stood up. He didn't storm off in a rage. He didn't throw his chair or kick the desk. He stood up with dignity, smoothing out his jacket. He buttoned his suit jacket, a slow, deliberate motion. It was the act of a gentleman who was leaving a party because the conversation had turned rude. The host looked up at him, panic in his eyes. Wait, we have time. We have the segment. You can't just," he sputtered, his mask of professionalism finally shattering completely. Keanu reached up and unclipped the microphone from his lapel. He held it in his hand for a second, looking at it, then placed it gently on the table. It made a soft click sound. "I think I can," Keanu said softly. "Have a good night." He turned and walked toward the edge of the stage. There was a moment of hesitation, a heartbeat where the entire world seemed to stop. Then, from the back of the studio, someone started clapping. It was a slow, rhythmic clap. Within seconds, the entire audience erupted. It wasn't just polite applause, it was a roar. People were standing up, cheering, shouting his name. It was the sound of a room full of people realizing they had just witnessed something real. The host sat there, shrinking into his chair, looking smaller than he ever had in his life. The applause washed over him, but it wasn't for him. He was just the debris left behind after a storm had passed through. The red on-air sign flickered off, but the feeling in the room lingered. Keanu walked off the stage, head high, not looking back. As soon as the cameras cut, the studio atmosphere changed. The magic of the moment settled into the reality of what had happened. Producers rushed onto the stage, not to congratulate Keanu, who was already heading down the hallway to his dressing room, but to check on the host. The host was wiping his face with a tissue, looking furious and humiliated all at once. He knew that in 10 minutes, clips of this interview would be everywhere. But they wouldn't be clips of him being clever. They would be clips of him being schooled on basic human decency by a man he had underestimated. Backstage, the crew members were buzzing. Cameramen, lighting technicians, and stagehands, people who usually didn't care about the celebrities, were whispering to each other. They had seen hundreds of interviews where hosts were rude and guests just took it. They had seen power dynamics played out 1,000 times. But they had never seen someone shut it down so effectively without raising their voice. Keanu didn't stop to talk to his publicist. He didn't stop to check his phone. He just walked into the quiet of his dressing room and closed the door. He sat down on the couch and let out a long breath. He wasn't thinking about the ratings. He wasn't thinking about the host. He was thinking about his girlfriend, hoping she didn't see the clip, or knowing that if she did, she would just laugh about how ridiculous the host was. Within an hour, the video was online. And just as the host had wanted, it went viral. But not for the reason he expected. The comments weren't about the insult. They were about the shutdown. Millions of people watched the clip, sharing it with captions like "Keanu Reeves is the hero we need" and "class personified." The host tried to tweet about it later that night, making a joke about sensitive celebrities, but the response was brutal. People were tired of the meanness. They were tired of the judgment. For a few days at least, the internet agreed on something: you don't get to be mean to Keanu Reeves and get away with it. The story became a legend, not because of a fight, but because of a boundary. It was a reminder to everyone watching that you don't have to be loud to be strong. You don't have to be cruel to be interesting. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand up, say no, and walk away, leaving the noise behind you. The host learned a lesson that day, one he wouldn't forget: real class isn't about who you sit next to, it's about how you treat the people you love.